The man in the dusty shirt's sun had barely risen above the horizon when Sundar Pichai stepped out of a modest hotel on the edge of town. The air was cool, filled with the scent of dew on dry grass and fresh coffee drifting from a corner cafe. Sundar looked around, his face calm, his clothes plain. Just a faded button-down shirt, old jeans, and worn sneakers. Nothing about him looked expensive or important. He carried no phone. No assistant followed him, and there was no car waiting outside. Just a quiet man walking alone toward something no one could yet see. It had been a long year. The kind of year that wears down even the strongest people. Sundar had traveled without telling anyone. No cameras, no announcements, just a journey of reflection. His success meant nothing to him now, unless he could remember why he started in the first place. He arrived in a small town known more for its old buildings and dusty roads than for tech or wealth. He had come to meet someone who once worked for him, but had returned here to build something new, something that mattered. But first, Sundar needed a car. He walked into the only dealership in town. A shiny building with bold red letters and spotless windows. Inside were polished cars, bright lights, and staff that looked like they were selling dreams. Not just vehicles, but none of them looked at him as he entered. He waited at the front desk. No one came. He walked toward a row of sedans. A salesman glanced at him, then away. Sundar reached out to touch the side of a car, and the man walked over finally, not with a smile, but with suspicion. "Please don't touch that," the salesman said coldly. "It leaves fingerprints." Sundar nodded gently. "I'm sorry, I just wanted to see how it feels." The salesman looked him up and down. "These cars are expensive. Maybe you'd be more comfortable over there." He pointed to an old used section near the back. "I'm looking for something reliable," Sundar said, trying to keep the peace. "Of course you are," the man said with a smirk, then walked away. A few other staff members watched and laughed softly. One of them whispered something about the man in the dusty shirt. Sundar heard it, but he didn't react. He waited again. 10 minutes. 15. No one came. He walked to the front counter. "Excuse me, could someone help me buy a car?" A woman at the desk barely looked up. "We're short-staffed today. Maybe come back later." Sundar looked around. There were at least 5 employees sipping coffee, scrolling their phones. He turned to leave just as he reached the door. Someone called out, an older mechanic wiping his hands on a rag. "Hey, sir, you need a ride?" Sundar smiled. "Yes, just something that can take me up the hill and back." The mechanic nodded. "I got an old Jeep out back. Not pretty, but she runs." They walked together toward the back lot, quiet except for the sound of gravel underfoot. Sundar felt a strange calm here. The mechanic didn't know who he was, and that was a relief. "You from around here?" the mechanic asked. "No," Sundar replied. "Just passing through." "Used to know someone here." "You don't seem like a stranger," the man said thoughtfully. "You carry yourself like you've built something or lost something?" Sundar paused. "Maybe both." The man handed him the keys to the Jeep. "No charge. Just bring it back before sundown. My name's Eli." "Thank you, Eli," Sundar said sincerely. He drove off, feeling more seen by a mechanic than by anyone in that big, shiny showroom. He spent the rest of the day driving through the hills, meeting the old friend who now ran a school for girls in a village nearby. They had tea. They laughed. They remembered the early days when dreams were just ideas, and ideas were everything. As the sun began to set, Sundar returned the Jeep, handed the keys to Eli, and said, "You're a good man." Eli smiled. "You too, whoever you are." Sundar glanced once more at the dealership, now closing its doors. He said nothing, just walked back to his hotel dock. But that night, something shifted. He sat alone in his room, thinking about how quickly people judge others, how much kindness matters, how power means nothing if it cannot be used to change what's broken. He made a call, a quiet one. "Hello?" The voice on the other end answered. "It's me. I want to buy something." "Of course, Mr. Pichai. What would you like to buy?" Sundar took a deep breath. "The car dealership in this town. The one that sells used imports? Yes, that one. Do you want to open a showroom? No, Sundar said calmly. I want to change it. And so, with that call, a new story began, not about revenge, but about respect, not about showing power, but about showing hard. Yet no one in town knew what was coming. The next morning would change everything, and none of them would see it coming. Asterisk whispers behind glass walls. Morning sun crept slowly over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the town as a gentle breeze stirred the leaves. The sleepy town awoke to the same rhythm it always knew, slow, quiet, and unaware that something had already begun to shift beneath its surface. The dealership, just like every other day, opened its glass doors with the same routine confidence. Staff arrived one by one, sipping coffee, fixing ties, brushing imaginary dust off their shoulders. They didn't notice the black car parked a little farther down the street. Quiet and still, watching inside the dealership, the manager, Derek, clicked open his laptop, already irritated. He had a habit of being irritated. The reports weren't ready, the numbers weren't good, and one of the new hires had already called in sick. But Derek didn't mind being annoyed. It gave him energy, purpose even. In his world, people were ranked by what they wore, how they spoke, and how quickly. They said yes. Anything else was a waste of time. He didn't remember the man from yesterday. To him, Sundar had just been another drifter with dust on his shoes and questions in his voice. Derek prided himself on knowing which customers mattered within seconds. He never looked twice at the ones who didn't. That morning, he was reviewing the previous day's security footage, trying to verify whether one of the team members had left early when he paused. There on the screen, barely noticeable, was the quiet man in the faded shirt. The camera angle caught Sundar waiting politely at the counter, glancing at his watch, then stepping away slowly after being ignored. Derek shrugged. Waste of a suit, he muttered to himself and closed the laptop. What none of them knew was that something far more powerful than money had entered their world. It wasn't about revenge. Sundar had already decided that. This wasn't about making them suffer. It was about something deeper, more painful, and more beautiful. It was about truth. Later that day, as the staff laughed over a shared joke in the break room, one about the Jeep guy and how he thought he could buy a car with lint in his pocket, the dealership's phone rang. The receptionist answered cheerfully, her voice high and practiced. Good morning, Redwood Auto. How can I help you? There was a pause. Then a calm voice replied, I'd like to speak to the owner. I'm sorry, the owner isn't available. Can I take a message? Tell them the buyer's ready. The receptionist blinked. The buyer for what? The business. What business? Yours. The voice didn't raise. It didn't need to. The receptionist stuttered, unsure how to respond. May I ask who's calling? But the line had already gone dead. Within the hour, a man in a dark gray suit entered the dealership. He didn't smile. He didn't offer greetings. He walked straight to Derek's desk and handed over a sealed folder. This is real, the man said before Derek could speak. The offer has already been accepted by the holding company. Effective immediately. This dealership is under new ownership. Derek stood frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open. What are you talking about? The man didn't blink. You'll be asked to stay temporarily while transition begins. A full staff review will be conducted. Derek laughed nervously. This is a joke, right? Is this a prank? No, the man said, then paused. But yesterday was. And with that, he turned and walked away. The news spread like wildfire through the building. Employees stopped mid-conversation, dropped their mugs, stared at each other in disbelief. Someone checked online records. Someone else ran to the back office. But it was true. The dealership had been sold. Not just bought, completely taken over. And no one knew who had done it. Until Eli walked in. He wasn't part of the dealership. But he knew something was off. He had heard from the local gas station that lawyers in fancy cars were arriving. People were whispering about some kind of big deal. And then he saw a photo on one of the news sites. It was a press image from years ago. A tech event. A man standing next to a chrome blue sedan. The headline read, Sundar Pichai appears at Clean Mobility Conference in Silicon Valley. Eli squinted, then smiled. He walked up to the receptionist, the same woman who hadn't looked up yesterday. Is Sundar here? She blinked. Who? Eli leaned in. The man who borrowed my Jeep, the one you all ignored. There was silence. He turned to leave. You're going to want to remember his face. Back at the hotel, Sundar sat quietly on the balcony, watching birds gather near a broken street lamp. He was thinking about how strange the world could be, how in one place you could be treated like royalty, and in another like an invisible shadow. He didn't feel angry. He didn't even feel smug. He felt ... resolve. His assistant stepped out with a tablet. The papers are finalized. Sundar nodded. Anyone push back? No. The owners didn't ask questions. Just signed. He looked at the screen for a moment, then turned away. Good. Now let's begin. The plan wasn't to fire everyone. Not yet. Sundar believed in teaching, in giving people a chance to grow, even the ones who didn't deserve it at first glance. The real goal wasn't punishment. It was awakening. He wanted them to feel what? It was like to be truly seen. Over the next few days, things began to change inside the dealership. Small things at first. The new owners installed a coffee station, but not the kind the employees used to sip from while laughing at customers. This one was open to visitors. Free, clean, kind. A small sign above it read, You are welcome here. Some laughed. Others rolled their eyes. But a few paused. Some part of them remembered what kindness once felt like. Then came the surprise inspections. One by one, employees were evaluated, not just on sales numbers, but on how they treated people. Every recorded conversation, every complaint, every ignored voice. Some staff members were nervous, some defensive. A few broke down crying in the back room, because deep down, they knew. They remembered the way they had treated that man. And they wondered if he had come back not just with money, but with memory. On the fourth day, Sundar arrived. He walked through the doors slowly. The same doors that had once stayed shut for him. No one recognized him at first. His clothes were clean now, pressed. His shoes new, but his eyes were the same. Calm, curious, kind. Derek saw him first and froze. Sundar walked up to him, not angrily, not proudly, just gently. Do you remember me? He asked. Derek swallowed hard. Yes. What did you see when you looked at me that day? Derek looked down. Someone who didn't belong. Sundar paused. And now? Derek's voice cracked. Someone who owns everything. Sundar shook his head. No. Someone who still believes people can change. That single line fell like thunder in the room. No one spoke for a long time. This isn't about me, Sundar continued. It's about everyone who ever walked into this place and felt small. It's about every person who didn't look like they could afford something, but still deserved respect. You don't need to be rich to be worthy. The staff listened. In silence. This place is going to become something new, Sundar said. Not just a place that sells cars, but a place that treats people with dignity, every person, every time. He turned and began to walk away, but before he reached the door, a voice called out that it was the youngest employee, Sarah. She had only been there 3 weeks. She looked nervous but stepped forward. Can we learn how to be better? She asked. I don't want to be like this place used to be. Sundar smiled softly. Yes, that's why I came. But just as the mood began to shift, just as something hopeful began to bloom, the door burst open. A man in a sharp blue suit entered, holding a folder. Pichai, he said coldly. We have a problem. Sundar turned, face calmed at the man. Continued. The sale has triggered a clause. Someone else claims partial ownership. They filed a block. Derek looked confused. Who? The man opened the folder and showed Sundar a name. Sundar's expression changed for the first time. He stepped back slightly. The room seemed to shrink around him. The name on the paper wasn't just anyone. It was someone from his past, someone he had trusted, someone who had vanished years ago. And now they were back, not to support him, but to stop him. Asterisk ghost from the Cadet room had fallen silent. The air, which had felt light just moments ago, now hung thick with tension. Sundar stared at the folder in the man's hands, not blinking, not speaking. His eyes, usually calm and clear, flickered with something. Darker now recognition, disbelief, and pain. The name on the document wasn't just familiar. It was personal. Ravi Menon. It was a name Sundar hadn't spoken aloud in years, not because he had forgotten it, but because forgetting had once been easier than remembering what they'd built and how it had all fallen apart long before the titles, the applause, and the boardrooms. Sundar and Ravi were just two young dreamers huddled in a cramped apartment in Chennai. They had shared books, food, laughter, and late nights coding by candlelight during power cuts. They both believed in technology not as a weapon or a status symbol, but as a way to make the world a little fairer. They had made promises, big ones, to each other, to their future. But then the world got louder. Offers came in. Money whispered things that idealism couldn't. People noticed Sundar. First, his way of listening. His quiet brilliance, his strange talent for making complexity feel simple. Offers followed him like shadows. Ravi, who was louder, sharper, and more ambitious in a different way, began to feel left behind. The last time they spoke was in a hallway outside a conference room. Voices raised. Words they couldn't take back. Something about loyalty. Something about betrayal. Sundar walked away. Ravi disappeared. And now, here he was again. Not in person. But in power. Eli, who had been leaning quietly in a corner of the dealership, stepped forward now. He saw something shift in Sundar's posture. Not fear, but a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. You all right, son? Eli asked softly. Sundar nodded, barely. That depends on what he wants. The man in the suit cleared his throat. Mr. Menon filed an injunction an hour ago. He claims co-investment rights through a dormant entity tied to the dealership's original franchising. Apparently, he acquired those rights 10 years ago, quietly. Legally, he holds 31% of the parent company. If he contests the sale, it could delay full ownership or block strategic changes. Garrick, still standing awkwardly to the side, finally dared to ask, so, what does that mean? The lawyer turned to him with a flat expression. It means, technically, Mr. Menon owns more of this dealership than any of you do. Sundar closed the folder slowly and handed it back. Where is he now? We don't know, but he left a message. Said he wants to meet in person. Today. He'll come to you. Outside, dark clouds began to roll across the sky. It was still morning, but everything looked dimmer, like the weather could sense the weight of the past creeping into the present. Sundar didn't speak for a long time after that. He walked outside, stood on the edge of the lot, and looked at the hills in the distance. His mind wasn't in the dealership anymore. It was back in that tiny apartment in Chennai, where he and Ravi had once written their first line of shared code on a borrowed laptop. He remembered Ravi laughing when the screen froze, banging the side of the old computer like it owed him something. He remembered the taste of instant noodles and dreams too big to fit in a single room. How had they come to this? Behind him, Eli stepped closer. Do you want me to tell him to go? No, Sundar said quietly. Let him come. By noon, the dealership had turned into a quiet waiting room. Employees whispered behind counters. Some Googled Ravi Menon on their phones. Others stood near the window, watching the road. And then he arrived. A black car pulled into the lot. Sleek, silent, and sharp, like the man who stepped out of it. Ravi Menon hadn't changed much. His hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, but his eyes were just as fierce. He wore a navy suit that screamed success in a face that wore no smile. He walked in like he owned the place, because part of him did. His eyes met Sundar's immediately. No handshake. No none. Just a long, loaded silence between two people who used to build dreams together and now stood on opposite sides of something they never imagined. Long time, Ravi said, voice low. 10 years, Sundar replied. 11, Ravi corrected. But who's counting? They sat in the office at the back of the dealership, door closed, windows shuttered. No one else was allowed inside. Not even a lawyer. Just the two of them facing each other again after more than a decade of silence. Why now? Sundar asked. Ravi looked around the room before answering. Because I saw your name on the documents, and I thought, what are the odds? After all these years, you walk into the one place I quietly invested in and decide to take over. It wasn't about you. No, Ravi said, voice hardening. It never was, right? Sundar let the sting sit there. This isn't about us. It never stopped being about us, Ravi snapped. You walked away. You took the path everyone said was right. You climbed faster, smoother, and quieter, and the rest of us? We watched you from the sidelines while pretending not to care. You had choices too. I made different ones, Ravi admitted. Some good, some not, but this place? This was mine before it was ever yours. Sundar leaned forward. Do you know how they treated people here? How they treated me? A man walked in with dusty shoes and they saw nothing. No value, no story. Just someone to ignore. That's what this is about. Ravi stared. And now what? You think you're going to fix the world? One dealership at a time? No, Sundar said softly. Just this one. Because this one is broken, and not just the cars. Ravi fell silent. Outside, the rain finally began to fall. Slow at first, then faster, as if the sky couldn't hold it in any longer. You still have your 31%, Sundar said. You can keep it. Or you can join me. Ravi narrowed his eyes. Join you? After all this time? Yes, but not like before. This isn't code. This isn't a company. This is a mirror. And it's showing us both who we've become. Ravi stood up, walked to the window, watched the rain dance across the glass. And if I say no, then I'll wait, not because I need your share, but because I believe people can change. Even us. Ravi said nothing. When he finally left the room, no one knew what had been said. Not the employees, not the lawyer, not Eli. He just got into his car and drove away without another word. Sundar remained in the office, staring at the rain. Later that evening, as the staff prepared to close up, a delivery truck arrived. They hadn't ordered anything. But it was real. Boxes upon boxes labeled with one simple phrase. Dignity is not optional. Inside were materials for a new training program, one designed to teach kindness, humility, and emotional intelligence. Sundar had developed it quietly with a small team months ago, never knowing where he would use it first. Now he did. As the boxes were unloaded. Eli stood beside Sundar. You think he'll come back? Eli asked. Sundar shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. And if he doesn't? Sundar looked out into the darkness, his voice quiet. Then I'll still be here because this story, it's not done yet. But just as he said those words, a new message lit up on his phone, down a photo, down a wall, graffiti. You don't deserve this town. Sundar stared at it. Thought someone was watching. Someone who didn't want change, and they were ready to fight it. Asterisk. The town that turned its facade photo burned in Sundar's mind long after the screen had gone dark. He had stared at it for nearly an hour, saying nothing, barely moving. On the surface, it was just a photo of a wall gray, cracked, forgotten. But what was sprayed across it in jagged black letters told a deeper truth. You don't deserve this town. The message was clear. It wasn't just a prank. It wasn't just graffiti. It was a warning, a rejection, a line drawn in the dust by someone who believed Sundar didn't belong here. No matter how much of the dealership he owned. That night, the air outside was heavy with humidity. Storm clouds hung low and brooding over the hills. Rain had come and gone, but it had left behind something unsettled in the soil. Something quiet and dangerous. Eli sat beside Sundar in the dim light of the office, sipping coffee that had gone cold. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. He could feel what Sundar was carrying, the weight of memory, the tension of purpose, the sting of being unwelcome. You think it's him? Eli finally asked. Sundar didn't look up. Ravi? Eli nodded. Double quotes, no, Sundar said. His anger is sharp, but not small like this. He'd come through the front door, not hide in shadows. Eli tapped a photo on Sundar's phone. Then who? Sundar sighed. Someone afraid. Afraid of what this place might become. The next morning, the dealership opened late. Not because of the message, but because the security system had been tampered with. Someone had disabled the cameras. Someone who knew exactly how to hide. Employees arrived to find the training materials, the ones that had come in those big brown boxes, slashed open. Paper scattered across the floor. Someone had taken markers and scribbled over the signs that read "Dignity is not optional." They had written new words instead. Bitter words. Go back to Silicon Valley. We don't need your charity. Stay out of our town. Sundar arrived last. He didn't come with police or lawyers. He came alone, walking quietly through the front door, his face unreadable. He picked up the torn sign from the floor, dusted it off, and placed it back on the wall. No drama, no outrage. Just resolve. Derek, who had been strangely silent since Ravi's visit, approached carefully. You think it's one of us? He asked, his voice lower than usual. Double quotes, I think, Sundar replied slowly. People lash out when they feel unseen, unheard, even the ones who do the lashing. He paused, then added, but I won't let fear write the rules here. The dealership's transformation had already begun to ripple through the town. Some people admired it. A single mom who had once been brushed off when asking about a family van now found herself treated with warmth and respect. A retired teacher was surprised when a young employee offered her a chair and a bottle of water without being told to. These changes mattered. They were real, but not everyone saw it that way. Across town, at a diner where locals gathered like clockwork, whispers were growing. Words like outsider, fake kindness, and stunt flew from booth to booth. Some believed Sundar was just trying to polish his reputation. Others believed he was building something only to flip it and leave again. And a few more bitter than cautious saw him as a threat to their way of life. You hear what he did? One man growled over his coffee. Fired Carl. Been here 16 years. He didn't fire him, the waitress replied gently. Carl screamed at a customer. Again. This time it was a kid. The man snorted. Doesn't matter. That was our mess to clean. Not some tech giants. At a nearby table, an older woman leaned in. Maybe he's what we needed. The man's voice turned sharp. No. What we need is to stop pretending people like him care about places like this. Meanwhile, at the dealership, Sundar held a quiet staff meeting. It wasn't in the big office. It wasn't formal. Just everyone gathered in the service bay, folding chairs in a circle, the faint smell of oil still hanging in the air. He stood in the center, not above them, not apart. This is not about me, he began, slowly. It's not about Silicon Valley. It's not about making a statement. He looked at each face. It's about what kind of place you want this to be. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down. But one person raised their hand. Sarah, the youngest employee. The one who had first asked to learn. What if people out there never accept it? She asked. What if they never accept you? Sundar smiled softly. Then we build it anyway. Because the people who need it will find it. And they'll remember. That night, after everyone had gone home, Sundar stayed late. He walked the lot slowly, watching the headlights of passing cars flash across the windshield glass. The dealership stood quiet, almost still, like it was holding its breath. He was halfway through the lot when he saw it. A figure, standing near the edge of the building. Hooded. UNMOVING. For a second. Sundar froze. Then, calmly, he stepped forward. You don't have to hide, he said, voice firm but kind. The figure didn't move. I know you're afraid. But so was I when I first came here, when no one saw me, when people laughed. I was afraid, not for me, but for what that meant, for what it says about us. The figure turned slightly. Just enough for Sundar to see a glimpse of a face. Young. Not angry, just hurt Dot, and then they ran Dot into the darkness. Gone in seconds, he didn't chase them. He stood there, watching the shadows close around the street. Dot when he returned to his office. A small envelope was waiting under the door. No name. No stamp. Just handwriting on the front that read, "You'll never fix what you don't understand." Inside the envelope was a photo. Dot, an old one. Dot, a younger Sundar standing in front of a crowd. Smiling, receiving an award, and beside him, half visible, was Ravi. Cut out with scissors. Dot, Sundar held the photo carefully. Dot, he knew then. This wasn't just fear. Dot, this was personal. Someone wasn't just angry at change. They were angry at him. Dot, and somewhere in the heart of this town, someone was planning to make sure the change never came. Asterisk, the truth between the cracks morning came out with sunlight. But with fog got thick, pale sheets of it rolled through the town like ghosts returning home. Storefronts blurred behind it. Trees stood like shadows. And even the dealership, so bright and open just days ago, looked muted, as if the whole world had lost its color. Sundar sat at his desk, the envelope from last night still beside him. Unopened again, though he had already read its contents a dozen times. The cut photo was now smooth, flat, under a paperweight. He had stared at that jagged line through Ravi's image, trying to understand what it meant, not just for their past, but for the present. Someone had kept that photo for years. Someone who had known them both. Someone who had waited until... Now to strike. He tapped his fingers slowly on the edge of the desk, thinking. The dealership was no longer just a symbol of respect and change. It was now a battlefield of memory. The threats weren't just from outside. They came from within, from people who remembered things differently. And in small towns, memory was sometimes more powerful than fact outside. The staff was quieter than usual. The news of the vandalism had traveled fast. So had rumors of the hooded figure. Some thought it was a teenager. Some whispered it was a former employee. And a few believed it was Ravi himself, watching from the shadows. Feeding resentment. Eli entered the office without knocking, holding a thermos and a file. "You need to see this," he said quietly, placing the folder on the desk. Sundar opened. Inside were printed emails, incident reports, and a handwritten letter from years ago. "What is this?" he asked. Eli sat down. "That's your ghost." The letter was from a boy named Nico. The name was familiar, but distant like a word heard once in a dream. He was an intern, Eli explained. Years ago. Came here after dropping out of school, worked under Derek for a while. Said he was interested in customer behavior. Always quiet. Always watching. Sundar read the letter slowly. The words were shaky, emotional, desperate. They don't see me. They laugh when I speak. I try to help, but they ignore it. The customers are hurting and no one listens. Mr. Pichai, you once said kindness was more valuable than code. I believed you, but now I wonder if I was wrong. Sundar closed his eyes. The fog outside seemed to push harder against the windows. He reached out to you? Sundar asked. Eli nodded. Years ago. When you first became CEO? I don't think it ever reached you. I never saw this. He thought you ignored him. Just like they did. The realization hit Sundar like a slow wave one that built over time and crashed not with sound, but with a suffocating silence. Someone had cried out years ago, someone who believed in him, and he never heard. And now, that pain had turned into something else. Something sharp. Something dangerous. Where is he now? Sundar asked, asterisk. We don't know. He left town. But someone matching his description came back last month. No one knows where he's staying. But he's here, somewhere. Outside, the fog began to lift. Slowly, reluctantly, Sundar rose from his chair. We're going to find him, he said. Not to confront, to understand. They searched in quiet ways, not with police, not with questions that felt like accusations. Sundar believed people only came out of hiding when they felt safe, not hunted. So he walked the town on foot, visiting small places most, had forgotten the library, the old bus stop near. The high school dot, the broken fence behind the church where kids used to sneak through on hot afternoons dot, each step brought back pieces of his own youth. The hunger to matter. The fear of not being good enough. The nights he had gone to sleep wondering if the world had a place for someone like him dot, and then he found it dot, a journal dot, not hidden, but left tucked under a bench outside the small park across from the dealership. The bench was worn, the wood cracked from rain and sun, and beside it was a thermos identical to the one Eli used, not just similar. The same dot Sundar opened the journal dot, the handwriting was rushed, uneven. I watched him again today. He smiles at strangers like they're old friends. It's fake, has to be. No one smiles like that for real. Maybe he means it, maybe that's worse. They ignored me. Laughed when I asked to leave the sales floor. Said I didn't look like I had the right voice. I watched people treat others like garbage because of their shoes, their skin, their words. And then he came, walked in like a ghost, and they laughed at him too. For a moment I felt peace. Finally they treated him like they treated me. But then he bought it, all of it, and now they bow to him. I don't know if that's justice or just a prettier mask. The words shook Sundar, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest dot too. Honest dot, he closed the journal and stood still. Then he did something unexpected. He wrote a note of his own. On the last page, I saw you too, not just now. Then, I'm sorry you weren't heard, that your voice was buried, but I'm here now, and this place is still yours if you want it to be. He left the journal on the bench, walked back to the dealership dot, said nothing, just waited. 2 days passed dot, no signs. No messages dot. Then, on the third morning, the fog returned dot, and so did the figure. This time, no who dot, just a young man standing outside the dealership. Holding the journal, eyes red but clear dot, NAKL dot. He didn't speak at first. He just walked inside. Sundar met him halfway. You read it? Nikhil asked, his voice rough from silence. Yes, Sundar replied gently. You left a note. Yes, you meant it? Every word. Nikhil blinked hard. I wanted to destroy this place. I know. I wanted you to feel small. I did, Sundar said, and I still do sometimes. Nikhil stared at him, unsure if it was a trick, unsure if this was the same man who stood on stages and smiled into cameras. But Sundar didn't break eye contact. You believed in something, he said, and no one listened. Now I am. Why? Because the people who try to tear things down, Sundar said, are usually the ones who cared most about building them in the first place. Nikhil breathed in, shaky dot, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, do you think people can forgive me? I think, Sundar said, people will follow you if you forgive yourself first. They stood in silence, but it wasn't heavy. Anymore, dot, it was full. Later that afternoon, a new banner went up at the front of the dealership dot, not printed, hand-painted. You are not your mistakes. You are your choice to begin again. Sundar didn't take credit for it. Neither did NIKAL dot, but everyone knew who had written it dot, and for the first time in weeks. The town didn't whisper. They listened dot, but just as the dust began to settle, just as peace seemed close enough to reach. Ravi returned, this time not alone. He brought investors, and one of them stepped forward with a proposal in hand. Bid dot to buy the dealership back dot at double the price. Sundar looked at the offer dot, then at Ravi, and realized this wasn't over dot, not yet. Asterisk, the key we leave behind sun rose slowly, golden and warm, as if it had been waiting for the right moment to break through the long days of fog. The town glowed gently beneath it, quiet, cautious, aware that something was coming, but no one knew how big, how final. How deep dot at the dealership, things had changed. People noticed. The front desk now greeted everyone with a smile. Not because it was required, but because the team finally understood what it meant to see someone. Customers who once left without a word now stayed for coffee. They lingered. They told stories. And sometimes they cried. Not out of sadness, but relief. Someone had finally created a space where they were more than their wallet. They were human. And IKL had returned not as an employee, but as a mentor. Sundar had offered him a role to rebuild the bridge between customers and staff, training people in empathy, listening, and reflection. At first, Nikhil hesitated. The shame of what he'd done lingered. But Sundar said something that stayed with him. Sometimes the most broken people carry the best instructions for healing. But just as the team began to find their rhythm, just as kindness became the norm and not the exception, Ravi stepped back into the dealership, not alone this time, but surrounded. 4 men followed behind him. Sharp suits, colder eyes. And in their hands, a document, a bid. Neat and thick and dangerously official. They didn't take a seat. They didn't offer greetings. They stood like a wall across the office floor. "We're buying the company," Ravi said, his voice measured. "Twice what you paid. The offer is clean. The funds are verified." Sundar didn't respond. Not right away. He looked at the paper. Then at the men behind it. Then at Ravi, his old friend, his old shadow, his old self. "Why?" Sundar asked quietly. "Because this town doesn't need a lesson," Ravi replied. "It needs a business. And you're turning it into a school." Sundar nodded slowly. "And you think money fixes that?" "Money makes it sustainable. You're building something emotional. People get tired of emotions. They want reliability." "No," Sundar said softly. "They want truth." "And you think this offer is the truth?" Ravi stepped forward. "I think it's the future." Nikhil, standing nearby, clenched his fist but said nothing. He was still learning to trust his voice again. Eli entered from the garage, wiping his hands with a rag, sensing the tension. "Well," he said gently, "feels like we're standing at a cliff, huh?" Sundar smiled faintly. "Maybe. But not. All cliffs are meant to scare you. Some are just the start of flight." Ravi frowned. "You're rejecting the offer?" Sundar looked around the dealership. At Sarah, who now trained 2 new hires in how to welcome someone without judgment. At a customer hugging a mechanic because someone had finally listened to her explain a sound. Her car made something no one ever took seriously before. At Nikhil, standing taller than he had in days. At Eli, who had once loaned him an old Jeep without asking for anything in return. And finally, back at Ravi. "No," Sundar said. "I'm not rejecting it." Everyone froze. Ravi, single quotes, twitched upward. "I'm not rejecting it," Sundar repeated. "Because it's not mine to reject." He turned to the staff. "This place belongs to them now." Ravi blinked. "What? I have signed over a majority. Ownership to the employees. They've been building this, not me. I was just the match. They're the flame." Ravi stepped back, confused, his offer now hanging between them like dead weight. Sundar continued. "You want to buy something? Talk. To them? Convince them? Because this time, no one gets to make decisions in silence." For a long moment, there was only the hum of the building. Then Sarah stood. "I vote no." Eli nodded. "Me too." Nikhil looked at Sundar, then at Ravi. "This place healed me. I don't want your version of it." One by one, they each refused. Not because of pride. But because they had seen what dignity felt like, and they weren't willing to sell it. Ravi stood in the middle of the room now, small in a way Sundar had never seen him. He turned to Sundar. "Why did you really do this?" Sundar walked toward the window, looking out at the street where it all began. "Because I was once ignored," he said. "And for a moment, it broke something inside me. But then I met people who reminded me that value isn't worn. It's lived. And I wanted to give them something more powerful than a second chance." "What's more powerful than that?" Ravi asked quietly. "A first chance," Sundar replied. "The kind they never got." The investors left without another word. Ravi stayed behind, watching the others as they returned to work. "You didn't just buy a dealership," he whispered. "You bought their belief." Sundar shook his head. "No, I built a mirror." They did the rest. Later that day, as the sun began to fall behind the hills, the team gathered outside, not for a meeting, not for training, just to be together. Sundar stepped forward one last time. Holding a small box. Inside was a single item. A key. Old, rusty, faded. He held it up. This was the first key ever used to open this building, he said. It's sat in a drawer for years, forgotten, like so many of you were. He placed it on the table. Keep it. Not to use, but to remember. That you never needed me to unlock this place. You only needed each other. They clapped. Some cried. And when the stars came out that night, no one felt small. Felt seen, respected, kind.